Twice now, I've pretty much said the base iPhone 17 is the phone most people should buy this year. And after actually living with it for about a week, I'm standing by that. The interesting thing about this year is just how close the base model is to the Pro models. Same display, same base storage, same front camera, and in day-to-day use, pretty much the same experience, which means the line between Pro and non-Pro is blurrier than it has ever been. I used the iPhone 17 as my main phone, just going off my life as usual, and found that unless you specifically want the Pro Max size, or you just really care about having a telephoto lens, this is the iPhone I'd recommend to pretty much anyone and everyone. That kind of puts the Pro model in an awkward spot. Once you look at everything this phone already does, and then look at what you're actually paying extra for, the value math does start to fall apart a little. So let's talk about why this is quietly, or maybe not so quietly, the best value iPhone in this year's lineup, and who, if anyone, should still be buying the Pro models. Starting with the design, on the outside, this looks pretty much exactly the same as last year's iPhone 16. We've still got the vertical stack of 2 camera lenses on the back with the flash and mic right next to them. Button layout is also exactly what we're used to now, with power and camera control on the right and volume and the action button on the left. Of course, on the bottom, you still got your speakers, mic, and USB-C port. One thing that is worth pointing out though is that the USB-C port here is still USB 2. So if you're transferring photos, videos, or other large files directly to a computer, it's going to be slower than the Pro models, which support USB 3 speeds. For most people, it's probably not a huge issue, but if you do that kind of thing regularly, it's definitely something to be aware of. Anywho, the only real changes this year come down to the color selection and the display. Color-wise, we got black, white, mist blue, sage, and lavender, which is a pretty solid lineup. Though I will say, I still think last year's ultramarine from the iPhone 16 is probably the best iPhone color Apple's ever done, with the 13 Pro's Sierra Blue being a very close second. I got the Sage model here, and it's definitely been a little odd using a phone this green, but it has grown on me. It looks clean, and it feels different without being overly loud. Cosmic Orange, I'm looking at you. Now where things do meaningfully change this year is the display, and this just might be the biggest reason the base iPhone 17 makes so much sense now. This is the same display you get on the Pro model that brings us up from 6.1 to 6.3 inches, which is mostly thanks to slimmer bezels. Now technically the phone is a little larger than last year, maybe like a millimeter or 2 in every direction, but it's not really that noticeable in the hand. You do definitely notice the thinner bezels though. They make the screen look a little cleaner and a little more modern. It's a subtle improvement, but it does make the phone feel a little nicer to use. And yes, we also finally have 120Hz ProMotion on the base iPhone. This was always the biggest drawback of the non-Pro models. Everything else was great, but once you've used a 120Hz display, going back to 60 looks terrible. So having ProMotion here is awesome. And just to quickly clarify, ProMotion isn't necessarily the display running at 120Hz all the time. It's adaptive, so when you're looking at static content like reading an article or just sitting on your home screen, the refresh rate can drop all the way down to around 10 Hz to save battery. And then as soon as you start scrolling or interacting with the phone, it dynamically ramps up to 120Hz. So you get the smoothness when it matters without constantly using extra power. On top of that, the always-on display has also made its way down to the base model, as well as a 3000 nit peak brightness, which pretty much means from the front, this is a Pro iPhone, except it's very green around the edges. But when you're scrolling, swiping, or just looking at and interacting with the phone day to day, you're getting the exact same experience you would on the Pro model. And of course it's still OLED, so picture quality is excellent. Deep blacks, great contrast, and just an overall really nice screen. Exactly as you'd expect from a modern smartphone. And speaking of things you'd expect, performance is still as awesome as ever. The iPhone 17 is running the A19 chip, which actually has the same number of CPU and GPU cores as the A19 Pro and the iPhone Air. 6 CPU cores and 5 GPU cores. The Pro chip does have a few extra doodads under the hood, but realistically, not much of that shows up in day-to-day use. Just like the A19 Pro, the A19 also has dedicated neural accelerators, so any AI tasks do run noticeably faster. If you're coming from an older iPhone, even an older Pro model, you'll definitely see a nice performance boost in Apple Intelligence features or other machine learning tasks. Although that being said, it is worth noting that pretty much any modern phone you buy today, whether it's an iPhone or an Android phone, is going to feel fast, especially at this price point. One chip might score higher than another in benchmarks, but that doesn't really translate one-to-one to real life. Opening apps, browsing the web, scrolling social media, all that feels great on any device at this level. So from a pure speed standpoint, there's really nothing to worry about here. Now there is no vapor chamber cooling system here like there is in the Pro models, so if you're doing sustained workloads, think long gaming sessions or extended video recording, the phone will heat up a little faster and throttle performance a bit sooner. But that's really never been an issue for me. And let's be real, if you're someone who uses your phone for serious production work, you're probably buying a Pro model anyway, so for everyone else, this just isn't a deal-breaking drawback. Day to day, my experience across all the iPhone models I've tested this year has pretty much been the same. They're all really fast, they're all super smooth, and there's really nothing performance-wise that feels like it needs to be improved. Which is nothing to scoff at because the iPhone Air and the 17 Pro Max are more expensive. On the software side, I know iOS 26 and Liquid Glass in particular has been pretty controversial, but personally, I love it. I think the design looks great and everything just feels fluid and responsive. But that said, I won't pretend it's perfect. Autocorrect has definitely gotten substantially worse, and I'd really love to see that fixed, but at this point, I've kinda just learned to live with it. I am looking forward to iOS 26.4 in the next couple months, which is supposed to bring a more capable version of Siri that'll make Apple Intelligence a bit more useful. But for now, we'll just have to wait and see. Now you really can't talk about performance without also talking about battery life. And this was genuinely the biggest shocker for me when daily driving this phone. When I first swapped my SIM, I was fully prepared to be watching the battery all day because the Pro Max battery is substantially larger than this one. But for my actual daily use, I never once had to charge it outside my normal routine. Now that I'm out of school, my days are mostly just work. Of course, I'm not on my phone a ton, but I do usually have music or a podcast playing in the background for a good chunk of the day. On top of that, the buildings I worked in are notorious for not so great cell service, which is usually pretty rough on battery life. But even with all that, I'd leave the house in the morning at 100% and get home in the evening with no less than about 60%. And by the time I was ready to put it on the charger at night, I was still sitting comfortably at 40 to 50%. I've mentioned in previous videos, I do use wired CarPlay whenever I drive, which gives the phone a little extra juice here and there on a slow charging port, but during the week I spent with the iPhone 17, I was actually driving way less than usual, maybe around 20 to 30 minutes total for the day, and I was still seeing those crazy battery numbers. So it's pretty safe to say you don't really need to worry about battery life here. My typical charging routine is just putting on a MagSafe charger overnight with the charge limit set to 80% for long-term battery health. And with results like these, you should be getting excellent battery life not just now, but for years down the line. Now another thing worth mentioning, for the first day or two, battery life was a bit worse than usual, which is normal when you set up a new phone. It's doing a lot in the background like indexing, syncing photos, or restoring apps, but once all that settles down, battery life does start to normalize. The camera is really the one area where you will notice a meaningful difference between the base iPhone 17 and the Pro models in day-to-day use. That said, the setup here is still super solid. You've got two lenses, a main and an ultra-wide, and both of them are now 48 megapixels, which is a nice upgrade over last year's 12 megapixel ultra-wide. That alone makes a noticeable difference. Ultra-wide photos have a lot more detail now, and they just look better overall, especially with good lighting. The main lens is what Apple calls their fusion camera, which basically means you can shoot full 48 megapixel photos at 1x, or 12 megapixel optical quality photos at 2x by cropping into the center of that sensor. And yes, of course, that 2x crop isn't going to replace a real telephoto lens, but for what it is, 2x photos still do look really good. When you zoom out and look at the overall lens experience, it's actually pretty similar to what we had on something like the iPhone 12 Pro or the 12 Pro Max. Except now, you've got a dramatically better 0.5 and 1x camera. I've been overlaying a few shots I took with the iPhone 17, and like I've said before, I'm not a photographer, by any means. I just make videos on the internet, but I do think these turned out pretty nice. On the front, you've also got the new 18 megapixel selfie camera that's on all of this year's models, which I've already talked about in my iPhone Air and 17 Pro Max reviews, so I won't go too deep here. But the short version is, it's a square sensor that lets you take portrait or landscape selfies no matter how you're holding the phone. It's actually a really nice upgrade. Video quality is also excellent. Of course, you don't get things like 4K 120fps recording, ProRes RAW, or Genlock like you do on the Pro models, but those are pretty professional level features. They also come with way bigger file sizes and much heavier editing requirements. That's why the Pro Max can be configured with up to 2 terabytes of storage for an eye-watering $2,000. For the kinds of videos most people actually shoot, stuff you're sharing on Instagram, sending to family and friends, or just saving for memories, the video coming out of this phone still looks excellent. And really, just like with performance, the camera on pretty much any modern smartphone, again especially at this price point, is going to be more than capable. As you move further up the price ladder, what you're really paying for is flexibility and the time, experience, and extra gear needed to actually take advantage of it. So at $800 US before trade-in, straight from Apple, with trade-in savings of around $150 to $400 for a recent base model, this is the iPhone to get. From a pure day-to-day use standpoint, you're basically getting the Pro experience just in a slightly lighter phone. The display, the performance, the battery life, all the things you interact with every single day are already here. The only real things you're missing compared to the Pro models are a larger size if you're looking at the Pro Max, the telephoto lens, professional photo and video formats, a better chip, and more advanced cooling system. And for most people, those things just aren't going to matter much for daily use. Unless you know you need these features, whether it's for photography, video production, or other very specific workloads, you're not really giving anything up by choosing the base iPhone 17. If you just want a phone that feels fast, looks great, lasts all day, and doesn't make you feel like you overpaid for features you'll never use, this is the one to get. And one last thing, kind of a follow-up to my 17 Pro Max review, when I picked that phone up again to move my stuff back over, it felt absolutely massive. Like, you don't truly grasp the absolute unit that phone is until you've gotten used to holding a normal size phone. But anywho, feel free to let me know what you think about the iPhone 17 and how it compares to the rest of the lineup, as well as to other phones like the Pixel 10 or Galaxy S25. Otherwise, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.